This isn't diplomacy, it's a coordinated squeeze. While Americans argue over headlines, troops are landing in Greenland, German soldiers arriving at Nuuk airport, forces from France, Norway, the United Kingdom, and Sweden running joint exercises, not symbolic visits. Drills built around one scenario. What happens if the United States makes a move? Here's the paradox. The louder Donald Trump talks about acquiring Greenland, the more unified the response becomes against him. And that matters to you, because when alliances harden, prices rise, jobs move, and security decisions get made without Washington in the room. On Thursday, European forces met directly with Greenland's Joint Arctic Command. They weren't debating theory, they were gaming out consequences. Meanwhile, public language has shifted. Leaders who once sounded cautious are now openly talking about power, fear, and speed. One president says freedom requires being feared. Another government starts redirecting trade away from the U.S., not overnight, but in phases designed to maximize leverage. And Trump's response? Threats of tariffs against countries that don't support him. Pressure instead of persuasion. But here's the part most people are missing. These moves only work if the other side blinks. And right now, no one is blinking. Something bigger is forming beneath the noise. New alignments, new assumptions. And once those lock in, the outcome isn't negotiated on television. It's decided before the next move is announced. What you're looking at isn't a single incident. It's a pattern forming in real time. On the surface, this story looks like it's about Greenland, an island, resources, national security. That's how it's being sold. But notice how much of the picture you're not being shown. This isn't just Europe reacting to one idea from one president. It's multiple governments at the same moment recalibrating how they deal with the United States altogether. You see it in the military exercises, you see it in the language shift, and you see it in the timing. As these drills are happening in Greenland, Canada's Prime Minister is standing in Beijing, finalizing a massive trade agreement with China, not a symbolic handshake. $1 trillion realignment that moves electric vehicles, agriculture, and long-term leverage away from the U.S. step by step. Now ask yourself this. If this were really just about Greenland, why is trade, defense, and diplomacy all moving at once? This is where the story flips, because when multiple countries adjust simultaneously, they're not reacting emotionally. They're planning structurally. They're assuming something about the future behavior of the United States and building around it. And once countries start planning around you instead of with you, influence doesn't disappear loudly. It drains quietly. So the real question isn't whether Greenland changes hands. The question is what signal the world thinks it's receiving from Washington right now. And the first proof of that signal is already on the record. Here's the first hard proof that this isn't speculation. It's already happening. Canada's Prime Minister doesn't hedge. He says it plainly. The future of Greenland is for Greenland and Denmark to decide. He invokes NATO. Article 5, collective defense, not as theory, but as a line in the sand. That's not diplomatic filler. That's a signal sent on purpose while standing in Beijing, finalizing a sweeping trade deal with China that reroutes electric vehicles and agricultural exports away from the United States. At the same time, France's president drops the language entirely. No ambiguity, no soft power framing. He says, in order to stay free, it is necessary to be feared. Then he backs it up with numbers. Defense spending accelerated, budgets doubled, timelines move forward, not someday, now. That combination matters more than any headline because words without action are noise. Action with money attached is intent. Now notice what's missing. No European leader is publicly walking back these statements. No one is saying this is a misunderstanding. No one is urging calm. Silence where reassurance should be is not accidental. This is the escalation phase that rarely makes the front page, the part where positions harden before anyone admits what's really at stake. And once leaders start speaking this way in public, it means the private conversations already move further. The next step doesn't happen on camera. It happens in coordination. This is where the story stops being about statements and starts being about exposure. Because while foreign leaders are hardening positions, the White House does something that completely changes how this is perceived overseas. Trump's own spokesperson confirms that the administration is holding regular talks about acquiring Greenland. Not hypotheticals, a working group, meetings every 2 to 3 weeks. The priority, she says, is clear. The United States wants Greenland. Then Trump goes further. On camera, he says he may impose tariffs on countries that don't go along with it. Not adversaries, allies, Germany, others. economic punishment tied directly to territorial ambition. That contradiction is impossible to miss. On one hand, the administration insists this is about national security. On the other, it threatens trade retaliation if partners refuse. Security logic doesn't require tariffs. Leverage does. And here's the line that changes how you see all of this. Trump openly frames it as transactional. Why pay, he asks, when pressure can force compliance? That isn't diplomacy. That's a test of who flinches first. Now notice the reaction. No country publicly caves, no emergency summits to reassure Washington. Instead, trade routes shift. Defense budgets rise, military coordination accelerates. This is the moment foreign governments stop asking what Trump wants and start planning for what he might do next. And when that shift happens, the risk is no longer theoretical, it's structural. Now watch how fast this stacks. While Greenland dominates the headlines, 3 other developments unfold almost simultaneously. Canada deepens economic ties with China, locking in long-term trade that doesn't depend on U.S. approval. In Asia, America's closest allies start acting as if Washington might not show up. Japan and South Korea align with each other, not because they want distance from the U.S., but because uncertainty forces redundancy. And in the Middle East, conversations emerge about new regional defense arrangements designed to function without American leadership at the center. None of these moves are dramatic on their own. That's the point. They're quiet, distributed, designed to reduce dependence before a crisis hits. This is what loss of control looks like in real time, not collapse, substitution. And notice the speed. Trade, defense, diplomacy moving in parallel. That only happens when governments believe volatility is no longer temporary. They're not hedging for a bad month. They're preparing for a different era. Here's the pressure point. When resources and attention get pulled toward one fixation, something else is left unattended. And right now, U.S. focus narrows while global coordination widens. So ask the uncomfortable question, what happens if this continues? Because once momentum shifts away from you, reversing it costs far more than stopping it early. Now bring it back to where this actually lands. On you. Because when alliances shift and trade routes reroute, the consequences don't stay abstract. They show up in prices, jobs, and stability. If Canada phases in trade away from the U.S., that pressure doesn't hit politicians first. It hits supply chains, manufacturing timelines, workers who suddenly find demand drying up not because they failed, but because leverage moved elsewhere. When allies stop assuming the U.S. will anchor security, insurance costs rise, shipping lanes get riskier, energy prices wobble. None of that requires a single shot fired. It happens quietly, contract by contract, decision by decision. And here's the part that should feel familiar. You don't get a warning. There's no announcement that says your country just lost influence. One day, things just cost more. One day, opportunities vanish. One day, decisions are made in rooms where your voice isn't present. That's why this isn't ideology. It's lived consequence. The kind that shows up months later and feels disconnected from the moment that caused it. If this feels familiar, if you've watched stability erode without anyone explaining why, say so in the comments, because what you're sensing isn't chaos. It's a system quietly adjusting. And that brings us to the mechanism that makes all of this possible. Here's the unsettling part that mainstream coverage keeps missing. This isn't driven by anger, it's driven by incentives. Systems don't respond to speeches, they respond to risk. When unpredictability becomes the constant, every actor does the same thing. They reduce exposure, not out of spite, out of self-preservation. Leverage is the mechanism. Trade leverage, security leverage, attention leverage. When one player starts using pressure publicly and transactionally, others quietly build options so that pressure stops working. That's why you're seeing parallel moves instead of confrontation. No dramatic breakups, just insurance policies being written in real time. And spectacle plays a role. Loud threats dominate the feed, while structural shifts happen off camera. That imbalance favors the side willing to move without applause. Power doesn't announce adaptation, it hides it. Here's the insight that should make you pause. Once enough systems adapt away from you, even correct decisions stop producing the same results. Influence decays, not because you're wrong, but because you're no longer central. That's why this moment feels different. It's not about one leader, it's about how quickly institutions learn. And now the trajectory matters more than the argument. Now look forward, because this is where uncertainty takes over. From here, there are two paths, and neither is clean. In one version, pressure escalates, tariffs expand, rhetoric hardens, allies respond not with confrontation, but with distance. More trade deals signed elsewhere, more security coordination that quietly excludes Washington. The U.S. remains powerful, but increasingly reactive, arriving late to decisions already made. In the other version, something slows this down. Not a public reversal, but a recalibration. The tone changes, threats get replaced with guarantees, focus shifts from acquisition to cooperation. That path doesn't restore leverage overnight, but it stops the bleed. It signals predictability, which is the one thing systems reward fastest. Here's the problem. Momentum already exists. Plans are already drafted, relationships already adjusted. Even if the message changes tomorrow, the next few moves are locked in by decisions made weeks ago. That's why this moment feels suspended, like the next action hasn't happened yet, but the direction has. And the most dangerous assumption right now is that nothing irreversible has occurred, because the final outcome won't hinge on a speech. It will hinge on whether the world believes the pattern is done forming or just getting started. Here's the takeaway that ties all of this together. Power doesn't disappear when you lose an argument. It disappears when others stop organizing their future around you. That's what this story is really about. Greenland isn't the prize. It's the signal. The signal that told allies to start preparing for a world where U.S. decisions might come with volatility instead of stability. Once that signal is received, systems respond faster than politics. Trade shifts before speeches change. Alliances adapt before voters notice. And by the time the consequences show up at home, the moment that caused them is already forgotten. That's the trap. Not provocation, not escalation, but distraction while the structure underneath quietly moves. So when you see loud threats, public pressure, and spectacle dominating the feed, ask a different question. Who is making plans without needing permission anymore? Because the next chapter of this story won't be announced with a headline. It will reveal itself through absence, missed meetings, lost leverage, decisions made elsewhere, and that's exactly what we'll be tracking next. If you want clear, calm analysis as this unfolds and before the consequences fully surface, make sure you're subscribed. This story isn't over. It's just moved to the part most people aren't watching yet.